For a few hours today, Starbucks shut down its 8,000 company-owned stores to conduct racial bias and sensitivity training after that now infamous arrest of the two black guys who were waiting for a friend in a Philadelphia store. About 175,000 employees took part in the training, which Starbucks founder Howard Schultz said earlier today was the first step in a much bigger discussion about race in this country.
We realize that 4 hours of training is not going to solve racial inequity in America or anyone coming into our stores that may have a problem, but we have to start the conversation.
But in reality, it's a conversation that started long ago, as we mark 55 years since the March on Washington, and a week from today, it'll be 50 years since Robert F. Kennedy was shot and killed just after he won the California presidential primary, and 2 months after delivering this speech in which he had to tell a crowd about the assassination of Martin Luther King, Jr.
What we need in the United States is not division. What we need in the United States is not hatred. What we need in the United States is not violence and lawlessness, but is love and wisdom and compassion toward one another, feeling of justice toward those who still suffer within our country, whether they be white or whether they be black.
As Attorney General, Kennedy fought for equal voting rights, is credited by many for helping push his brother into the center of the civil rights movement, urging JFK to take a stand as president. I'm joined now by the grandson of RFK, the great-nephew of JFK, and a decently accomplished guy in his own right, U.S. Congressman from Massachusetts, Joe Kennedy III. It's good to see you, Congressman.
Thanks
for being here. You never met your grandfather. I actually heard him speak on a street corner in Philadelphia, and I will never forget it. What do you think of when you first hear people talking about him, whether it's an anniversary or just the conversation? What's in your head first?
So I think two things. One, most of the stories that come back are positive, and I'm grateful for that. I appreciate that. There's always a bit of a disconnect, though. Most people, and quite understandably, look at my grandfather or his brothers and sisters for what they meant to the country, and obviously that's something I'm very proud of. What they miss is the fact that he was also grandpa, right? He was a dad and a brother and a son, and they focus, there's a lot written and said about the Kennedy family. Much of that is Kennedy and not so much on family, and we're a family too. And so it's, that family part is the part that doesn't quite get as much attention, and that's the part that I still try to keep pretty close. You
were here several months ago after Larry Ty was here, who wrote, I think, a brilliant biography of your grandfather, and I asked you if you're going to read it. You said no. How do you learn about, not the family part of RFK, how do you learn about the professional, the public part of your grandfather?
So a lot of it does come through your high school history classes or college history classes, and look, you absorb some of it from the job that I hold and just being, I think, an active, engaged in our society. That being said, Jim, I'm not quite sure how viewers will hear this. When it comes to whether it's a film or a book, and there's a lot of really talented and dedicated journalists that have tried to play it straight, but you're still inserting a writer, a producer, somebody else in between yourself and your grandfather, in between me and my grandfather, and that just seems like an odd thing to do. So I don't doubt Larry's book has gotten an awful lot of critical acclaim. A lot of people that I think are pretty smart and objective followers of history have spoken very highly of it. And I appreciate the fact that Larry did such a good job with it. There's still something there that I keep for me.
Do you watch video? I mean, I've probably watched that speech in Indianapolis in my lifetime 50 times, maybe even 100 times. Do you watch things like that, or is it too hard?
I see it kind of in passing. I don't, given the anniversary that's coming out, there's a lot of books that are coming out. There's a lot of clips that have come out. I don't seek it out. Sometimes you can't necessarily avoid it. But look, I'm proud of the contribution that he made. I'm proud of that speech. I'm proud of what he stood for. And the fact, more than anything else, that he believed in the American public. And he believed that there was more that united us than divided us. And I think that message is resonating particularly strong today.
Can we talk about one of the legacy organizations, the RFK Children's Action Corps, right here, founded a year after he was killed? Describe to people who don't know, what's the primary focus of the work?
It's kids. It's kids in the juvenile justice system and in the child welfare system. So it's literally the most neglected, abused, most fragile among us. Phil Johnson, a dear family friend, started a year after my grandfather passed. And they've grown throughout the state of Massachusetts, and they have partnerships now around the country. And they're focused on community-based programs, residential treatment, and juvenile justice.
Like what? Give us an example.
So one of the great programs that they've got in Boston is the Diversion Advocacy Program. And it tries to make sure that those at-risk youth and those folks caught up in the criminal justice system will get diverted and be able to stay out of that system rather than get sucked into it at a young age. They do everything from handling residential treatment for some youth that have had literally unimaginable circumstances before us, whether that's sexual abuse and neglect. Jim, I mean, the staff that works there has told me a story of a child that was found essentially in a dog crate. Another one where a family drove up to one of their facilities, let one kid out, and drove off because they didn't have the ability to care for two, and so they had to choose which child to care for, and they dropped the other one off. So it's those kids that this organization seeks to serve.
Do you feel sadness that you never met him? Is that an emotion you experience?
I obviously wish I did. From what people say, he's an incredible man. I also recognize I'm not alone with folks that weren't able to meet their grandparents for an awful lot of reasons. So.
You know, getting back to the kids thing for a minute, virtually my radio co-host, Marjorie Egan, will often say, saying you're doing it for the children is the refuge of every political scoundrel. I'm paraphrasing what Marjorie would say.
Thanks, Marjorie.
But it's true. Do you not feel, as important as the work is that organization is doing, I know you're involved in it, do you not feel that we're losing this battle? When you wake, well, you don't have to wake up because you're a member of Congress, and you see that we are separating children from their parents when they attempt to cross this border illegally. Could you ever have imagined, I mean, no matter how tough someone wants to be on illegal immigration, I mean, isn't it possible that it's going away from helping kids in a country that is willing to do that to a family?
There are, for all of the outrages that we've seen over the course of the past 18 months, in my mind, under the Trump administration, few have been as unconscionable as this. And not only, look, as a dad of two very young children, the idea of having your children taken away from you. But for those that are actually in charge of making these decisions, understanding that their relatives came here in stories, in all likelihood, not all that different from the same ones that these individuals are going through. So the lack of acknowledgement of our nation's history, the lack of empathy, the lack of understanding that, yes, we clearly need to have and should secure our borders, but there's a degree of humanity that comes with that as well, of saying that a parent is a parent and a child is a child. And the idea that you're separating that every religion in the world tells us is a sacred bond, that our government was built to actually try to protect. You hear every single politician say that you want to maintain the sacredness of your family.
Which
but
is
our
doing
government that's
that.
tearing them apart. And the idea that we are somehow countenancing that by saying it is okay, that there weren't colleagues of mine immediately rejecting it, is staggering. And I really hope that changes.
You know, we played a little sound from Howard Schultz, the Starbucks guy, in anticipation of these afternoon's closings. Everybody in America is talking about the disgusting tweets from Roseanne Barr and the fact that she was fired, her show was canceled by ABC. But then you step back and you watch a speech like your grandfather's, which is, I think, one of the most memorable in American history. What did he get, do you think, about race relations that we appear to be totally clueless about in 2018?
Jim, I'm not so sure I can speak to his insight to race relations. I think what I interpret from that speech and others is just a human connection, whether it was the crowd that gathered in Indianapolis on April 4th, whether it was a crowd of students in South Africa in 1966, whether it was the crowds that greeted him across an Oregon primary or a California primary or an Indiana primary. That in people is potential, and that there are connective threads through all of us by nature of being human, and certainly by nature of being Americans, that we recognize and should celebrate. And yes, it is a broad, diverse, and widespread country, and with that comes a divergence of opinion and a divergence of background and a divergence of faith. But there's strength in that. Not it doesn't just have to be bad, and to celebrate that and lift people up by it. And what I struggle with at this moment in our politics is, for some reason, looking at people and saying that there is some inherent difference, that people are somehow ranked, worth more or worth less, based off the color of your skin, the God of your prayers, the gender of your spouse, how you identify, the country of your birth, that somehow somebody's ranked more or less, and that literally, etched in stone above the doors of the Supreme Court that my office looks out on, says equal justice under law. We know we have fallen short, but our history, our story is made good on it, and we are walking it back deliberately every day.
When you hear that your uncle, Robert Kennedy Jr., is challenging the notion that Sirhan Sirhan was the lone shooter in the assassination of your grandfather, what's your reaction?
I haven't spoken to him about it. I'm not all that familiar with the rationale behind it. I don't have a whole lot to add to what he said. We
only have 30 seconds left. What kind of burden do you feel? I mean, I remember a time when he was a Kennedy. I was going to say under Kennedy under any rock, and I didn't mean it that. I mean, there are a lot of Kennedy. I mean, you're it today. I mean, what kind of burden do you...
None. Look,
yes, you do.
No, Jim, look, they set if you're going to compare yourself to President Kennedy or Robert Kennedy every day, they set the bar pretty high. Senator Kennedy.
I'm not talking about even in comparison. You don't feel a burden when you wake up and you're the Kennedy in office with that?
I don't think of it that way. I do think of, look, my family has been extremely fortunate and very blessed. And in that comes, and I think the recognition that most other families in this world don't have the blessings that we do. And so with that comes a responsibility to make a contribution. And you can choose whichever way you want to do that. And I hope to make mine.
Hope your kids sleep tonight, Joe Kennedy. It's good to see you, Congressman. Great to see you. I appreciate your time. Joe Kennedy, thanks. And if you want to check out the RFK Children's Action Corps, visit rfkchildren.org.